Today on Empowering Workplaces, we're thrilled to welcome Dr. Shonna Waters and Dr. Erin Eatough, co-founders of Fractional Insights. With decades of combined experience in organizational science and executive leadership, they've pioneered a breakthrough approach called psychological ergonomics, helping companies engineer human performance for business success. If you're in the business of looking to create happier, better workplaces, this is a must-listen episode. Welcome to Empowering Workplaces, a show for anyone who wants to make work better and more fulfilling. We're your hosts, organizational psychologist Sanja Licina
and aspiring leader Guille Santana. Join us in today's inspiring conversation.
Erin and Shonna, it is so wonderful to have you on the podcast. I just got to know of you several months ago, and it quickly, we became friends. I'm one of your biggest fans, and it is just, it's so heartwarming to have you here because you are so smart. You bring so much good to the world, and Guy and I are just above the moon with the opportunity to share all of this goodness with our listeners. So thank you so very much for joining us. You also both have a really fascinating story of how you got to do what you're doing. So before we jump into what Fractional Insight does and what inspired you with the journey, we'd love for you to each tell us a little bit more about yourself. So Shonna, why don't I turn over the mic to you and please tell us your story.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, Sanja and Guy, thank you for having us. It's such a treat to be here, having this conversation with you both. So I'll give you a little bit of my journey going way, way back. And this really starts as a child, where I noticed in my own family that work could either really crush human potential or unlock it. And, where I saw this was over multiple generations that, we went from being coal miners to PhDs in 2 generations. And that was really because organizational systems and protections evolved in a way that enabled that transformation. And so, when I think about my grandfather died of black lung very young, because it was not a belief at that time that organizations had a responsibility for the safety of their employees, even the physical safety, right? And then it was only through really the opportunities that the military provided where my mom was able to get out of those kind of conditions, get access to education, advancements in things like gender rights that ended up enabling me to go on to get my PhD. So I just saw this huge impact that work can have on our lives, on our communities. And I had my personal aha moment when I was working at Starbucks in high school. And, it was really my first college was their coffee academy. And I saw this direct line from investing in your employees and their success and benefits to having these fiercely loyal customers, where I knew every customer's name and drink before they, even walked up to the counter. And that inspired me ultimately to get my PhD in industrial organizational psychology to try to understand the science that really linked these people practices behind the counter to business success across it.
That is an incredible story. And I feel like as you were talking, and I got goosebumps because it's incredible how much can change in just a couple of generations, and how much all of those realizations and passions through your mom, through your grandfather, helped shape who you are. And even I think sometimes when we experience certain things personally, we're talking about employee experience and customer experience, and I feel like you can read about that, but when you personally experience it like you did, it resonates and internalizes so much more. So what a wonderful way to have you become a part of the IO community.
Thank you.
Oh my gosh, thank you. It's a really wonderful story. Erin, I know I got to know a little bit more about you over the last few days, but I'd love to learn more, and I'd love to have you share your story with our listeners as well.
Yes, Sanja and I were at a conference together last week, so we had some extra time before the podcast. But my background is similar to Shonna. I had a lot of important observations of the role of work in my family's life, and in particular, saw my parents make lots of decisions that really were about protecting our fundamental security. So ensuring that, we had financial income, and then making decisions about work, primarily out of a drive to have health care, which is a basic need that many of us have. And even to the extent that when I was in college, really fascinated by psychology, my parents really encouraged me to consider how I might blend psychology and business in a way that allowed me to have more security my professional career and endeavors. And so, the drive for that, led me to explore lots of different avenues to pursue my passion around human experience and human behavior, and ultimately ended up in occupational health psychology, and was in academia for a period at the beginning of my career. And when I was in academia, there's so many beautiful things about being a professor and running a research lab. But one of the things that became clear to me was that the incentive structure and systems around academia did not lend themselves very easily to mechanisms for impact inside of organizations. And I was feeling like that was a really important part of the impact and difference I wanted to make on the world, not just the discovery of new knowledge and science around human behavior at work for the sake of the discovery of new knowledge, but for the sake of really making a difference and finding better solutions. And so that's what ultimately led me to leave academia, pursue industry, and now co-found Fractional Insights with Shonna as the Chief Science Officer.
Oh my gosh. Well, also an amazing story. And I always love hearing from going from academia to applied, because I think sometimes those are the most powerful transitions, because you learn how to really understand workplaces, how to understand people, those very rigorous research methods. And then we all know that applying them to the real world sometimes is not as easy. However, we come with this responsibility to still do things right and not to cut corners. And so I think that there's this beautiful combination. So Erin, you had just mentioned about Fractional Insights and that you two co-founded it. So I'd love to hear, can you tell our listeners more about what is Fractional Insights and what did lead you to co-found it?
Yeah, well, we're a research-backed consulting firm. And, obviously Erin and I are both organizational psychologists. And as a result, we use a science-backed method that we call psychological ergonomics. And that's really to help companies align their workplace with how people actually think and behave. So we're wired to work, but how do we make it so that the work is really aligned to our basic needs? And this both reduces friction, but it also improves company performance. So that's really what our organization is designed to do. And I can tell you a little bit about where we saw that need. I mean, Erin and I met when we were working at a company called BetterUp. And BetterUp is this really incredibly powerful transformation platform for individuals in organizations. And so, we saw the impact that they could have on individuals and, how that could ladder up to organizational performance. But we also saw that companies really struggled often with the foundational strategy, and that they needed help diagnosing the core issues that they were having and designing the system of work. And that's something that's hard to do with software alone. And so we really started Fractional Insights to fill that gap.
I'm so glad you did, because when you were talking about even just connecting the well-being and performance, it's another one of those areas that you would, think maybe if we were having this conversation 20 years ago, like, oh, by 2025, it's going to be a no-brainer and everyone's going to believe it. And well, let's just say that I think a lot of organizations still have a huge opportunity to benefit from the work that you both do. So I'm so glad that you do, because I do feel like in some ways it's such a fundamental human right to be in a workplace that does provide you strong well-being and cares for you. But unfortunately, it still a lot of times feels like a luxury more than a human right still. And so I think that the work you're doing is so important and so critical as we think about the time ahead and everything that's going on around us today. I feel like it's a really good time for you to be on the radar of as many organizations as possible, because I also think internally it's really hard for organizations to sometimes maybe take a step back and have a really objective view of what they need to do. And so that's, I know a lot of times they think, oh, but especially bigger organizations have so many resources and they can do a lot of things internally. But Erin, as you were mentioning, we were just at a conference together. And one of the things that I loved the most about it was just open-mindedness of even these really large organizations to say, we don't have it all figured out. And we love to bring people in and have an external perspective, because it just helps us not only realize our blind spots, but really helps us accelerate this progress that oftentimes we wanted to do, but for whatever reason we couldn't. So thank you both so much for this incredible, contribution to our community.
Oh. Well, thank you. And I think you're so right. Sanja, it's like, and this is related to the work that you do too, it's like, how do you, when you're so tied up in the day-to-day work and there are so many big questions that don't have established answers, we're looking at AI as a massive catalyst, an opportunity to say, like, how do we reorganize given the tools and capabilities that we have accessible to us now in a way that works better for everyone and gets better outcomes, for individuals to thrive and organizations to be successful.
Yeah, absolutely. And there are no right or wrong answers at this point. It's just getting as many smart, educated, open-minded individuals together to brainstorm the best options and then see how quickly we can learn and iterate. But it's absolutely, there's no, my son, he's 6.5 years old and he loves math. He loves math. In math, there's a right and wrong answer. It's not very gray. This is anything but right or wrong. It's just anything's a possibility. And how can we really all get together and in some ways make these big bets and push boundaries to be able to get the most out of it. And again, be able to keep all of this important human element like well-being as a part of it, to not bulldoze. And because in the wrong hands, you could have the danger of thinking of, solely productivity or efficiency. And I think that would be such a shame, because it would leave so many important things behind.
Absolutely.
And now that we're talking about reorganizing in a way that works for everyone, you recently published an amazing report called The Risk of Angst: How Unmet Human Needs Create Drag on Organizational Performance. And I wanted to ask you, why now? And how did this idea come about? Why angst?
Yeah, great question, Guy. Thank you. Well, the idea was actually born out of these conversations that I was having with my successful mid-career friends. So, on paper, they were thriving, they were still progressing in their careers and all of this stuff, but they were experiencing this real sense of restlessness and what I would almost call longing, right? So it was this frustration and anxiety that I kept describing as like this unseen undercurrent, right? It felt like there was this risk that organizations weren't seeing where, people weren't leaving their jobs yet, but if they had a better option, they would take it. Right. And seeing how the landscape was changing with platform-based employment and freelancing and fractional and all of that, I just kept saying there's going to be something at some point that emerges as an alternative. And this is going to create a risk, because if employees are walking around with this sense of unmet needs or angst, everybody's kind of in trouble. So,
Yeah,
Erin,
we wanted to test this idea that Shonna is describing about angst scientifically, of course. And so our hypothesis was really based in or rooted in over 100 years of motivation research. I mean, we've been studying human behavior at work and psychology of humans at work for a long time. And so our hypothesis was that the feeling of angst was really the result of a misalignment between what people fundamentally need, our core needs as human beings, and what their jobs or organizational structures and systems were providing them. And the three core needs that we ended up studying were the needs for security, for growth, and for significance.
Oh, how much of that has come up in my research too. So as you're saying that, I'm like, yes, and there's such a huge opportunity. So as somebody, of course, so Guy and I sit on the side of employee surveys and how do we, get insights from our employees and how do they feel? So very much aligned to the research that you both are doing. So Erin, you were talking about this misalignment, and if somebody is listening to us and they are maybe in charge of their employee listening program, or they're a leader and they just want to say, okay, are my employees experiencing angst? What does that look like in a modern workplace today? Or what could they be maybe thinking about or asking or testing? And I would say probably everyone's experiencing some of it based on the report I've seen. I've seen you two put out, maybe it's more or less, but if somebody's sitting there and saying, okay, I love this research and I want to understand it better inside my organization, what does that look like? Or maybe how could I even measure it? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, so like I said, we studied these three core needs: security, growth, and significance. And essentially, when you've got a need as a human that is being unmet, that is what results in the angst, in the friction that creates that feeling manifested as angst. And so there are three forms of angst, one that is associated with each form of human need. Yeah. So the first one is the angst of insecurity. And that is this feeling like you're vulnerable, like you don't have safety. You might not feel like you have job security. You might feel like your environment is not stable, or even just that you have to constantly look out for yourself. There are threats around you and you have to be very vigilant to protect yourself. So that's the angst of insecurity. The angst of stagnation is the next one, which is associated with growth, our need for growth. And so that sense of stagnation is about being sort of in a situation where your potential is really untapped and you're not able to realize your skills are not being applied. You're not able to feel as relevant as you'd like, or that you don't see a pathway for continuing to learn, grow, develop. And it kind of is like a feeling of stuckness. Yeah. And then the final one is the angst of insignificance, which corresponds to our need for significance and meaning and purpose. And so this is like a sense of you're kind of just a cog in the machine. Like you could be swapped out easily. It doesn't really matter. You're not really seen or heard. You're kind of lacking in purpose or mattering. And you might even feel like your time is wasted, or that you're working on work that's doesn't really make a difference or have an impact. And so those are the three forms of angst that we measured. And those ladder up to our angst index scale. And so we've got measurement approach for that, but we've also done our own research to your point, and I'll let Shonna speak to some of the insights that we found about those angst levels.
Yeah, absolutely. So you can measure angst directly through things like the angst index, but ultimately it's like, well, so what? While we certainly want employees to be happy at work, most organizations are pretty focused on the business impacts. And so we were able to look at that too. And what we found is angst isn't just this individual feeling that affects me, it's also a drag on my performance. So what our research found was that, as you were saying, Sanja, it's 44% by our estimation of the workforce experiences measurable angst, and that high angst employees have 33% lower performance and are 5.5 times more likely to be disengaged. So this creates, this retention tension paradox too, where when employees are feeling insecure, they cling to their jobs out of fear, and they're far more likely to also accept an offer when it comes up. Sort of that hypothesis that we had first coming into this, that there's this risk if their needs aren't getting met, that if an offer comes up where they feel like they can get those needs better met, they will take it and leave.
Wow. I'm glad we're friends now, because I definitely have so many things I want to talk with both of you that will not fit on this podcast. But I'm going to take a note, because they're just so, yeah. Well, I'll table that. I'll parking lot it for our next conversation, or maybe the next podcast, because there's just so many human levels, and I'm trying to think of like organizational impact versus individual, and what individuals can work on. And anyways, there's just a lot. But how, it's just such important work, and I could see so many external factors impacting organizations too. And that's a big reason of why it's so important to measure it as well, because a lot of times we think if there's not necessarily a big change inside our organization, maybe we're okay, but there's so much that happens outside that is also having an impact on people. So anyways, a lot.
Absolutely. And that was something that, I actually was looking at again just yesterday for something else, where high performers in particular, they're more likely to leave in general, but particularly when there's labor market volatility, their likelihood of quitting increases. And so when you think about what's going on in our context right now, it's these high performers who potentially, 400% more productive than your average performer. And if you're in a complex job, 800% more productive than an average performer. Those are the ones who end up being at most risk of some of this as well.
I hope our listeners right now are having a good sense of panic to really connect with their people, because I also know both from an organization all the way down to an individual manager level, when things are so chaotic, sometimes you think oh, maybe I don't need to have that one-on-one, or maybe we just really need to jump into our agenda. But that's when that personal connection and understanding how somebody is really doing is more critical than ever before. And so to your point, sometimes people could think, oh, but in a volatile market, a person's more likely to stay, because you could have the philosophy, first in or last in, first out for an organization. So if you just join somebody and they have to have a layoff, would you be the first one to go? So all of these different things where I could see employers falling into this trap of thinking, oh, but my top performers are okay because maybe they're still performing well, or they have security here and they wouldn't go. So I would definitely, for those of you listening, I don't want to panic you, but go talk to your top performers. Now's the time.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And Sanja, I think what you're pointing out is so important, because, the way that leadership thinks about the importance of these findings, and as Shonna said, these unseen undercurrents is, critically important. And especially because right now, so many organizations are asking these pretty fundamental questions about AI transformation, future of work, org structure, humans and AI working together. What is a job? What is a task? What is a skill? How do we figure all this stuff out in a very new and different context? And what surprised me when I was looking at our angst data was that many organizations, I think, are typically taking a very segmented approach to their talent, and thinking about hypos versus others, or underrepresented versus others, and there's lots of categorizations that organizations use. But when we looked at angst, we could not find one demographic category or feature that overrepresented or underrepresented angst. It is ubiquitously a experience that across generations, across work types, industries, this is a pretty ubiquitous experience to have this high angst. However, there was one exception, And that was hierarchical level. And so leaders who are at a higher hierarchical level have less angst than those who are further down the hierarchical chain and thus further away from power and authority and access to information and all of these things. And so what I think is really important about that is that, like, ICs, for example, have twice as much angst as executives. And so the constructed reality that organizational leadership lives in is very, very different than the reality that most of the people in the organization are experiencing. And so this really challenges us as leaders to perspective take and have insight into what the experience is of others, because we have to recognize that, you know, if you are an organizational leader, your experience is fundamentally different.
Oh, and that when you were saying the one group, I was hoping it was not that one, because I think that's where is the biggest danger. Because a lot of times people tend to act on their intuition. And if I'm going through something, I'm much more likely to be in tune and ask others. But if I'm not, it's not going to come naturally. So that's probably why, not probably, but it's definitely why it's even more important for your findings to get in the hands of as many people as it can, because again, those individuals that can probe and understand, like, what do we need to do as an organization? What do I need to do for all of my people, maybe especially my top performers, will not come naturally to them.
Right.
Oh boy.
But this is why, like, data becomes so important too.
Yeah.
Because, you know, I think as you're saying, if you're aware that your own perception of reality is not the same as the majority or other groups in your organization, a big part of the solve for that is collecting more information that does represent their other realities, you know?
Yeah. And, you know, sometimes I wonder how much, because I would think, like, I would hope that over the last years, like, kind of it's become second nature for most people to know these big differences in experiences and big differences that in how I see the world or what might concern me doesn't concern others. But there are things that they're very worried about that maybe I'm not. What worries me, though, is that, like, a lot of us on this call are psychologists. A lot of people in our circle are psychologists. A lot of people that we work with are, you know, in people departments. And so do we know more because of the nature of our work? But as a person who doesn't really think about this every day, are they as aware of this as we are? And I'm kind of worried, like, again, I'll say, like, I fancy myself an optimist, but I do worry about this, that maybe for us, we think that we've come farther along as a humanity than we actually did. And then bringing this very proactively up in front of people who wouldn't naturally pick up your report, maybe, or who wouldn't even naturally, like, listen to this podcast. That's where it's most important, because that's probably where the gap between the reality and their awareness is the biggest.
Yeah. It's such a great point, and we talk about that a lot. Is like, how do we get to the people who aren't already part of the choir?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing those insights. I feel like you're opening my eyes to new perspectives. And I gotta say, one thing I love the most about your report is how you balance, like, the strong data with human impact. And I wanted to ask you, how do you approach that balance in your own work?
Yeah, well, thank you for that. That's very kind. And, you know, we really believe you can't separate them, right? Because observation plays such a critical role in research. And, you know, as I was talking about even the idea for this research coming from, like, my lived experience and observation of the people around me, you know, that's really almost always the first step, which is, you know, scientists identifying patterns and then raising questions about the world. And then that driving these research questions that we develop and our hypotheses, and, you know, Erin and I sitting in a room and figure out how we're going to actually study this in a systematic way. And so a lot of our observations come from observing people at work, or people in relation to work, even, you know, in my running group, for example. But that then starts with these like really human stories, and what are the patterns that we notice across coaching clients, or the intractable issues that our colleagues and leaders in organizations are showing up with across companies. And then we use data to really understand those problems better at scale. And for us personally, a big part of our passion is connecting the individual experiences to these systematic patterns that leaders can actually impact and fix, and giving, data just gives voice to that human experience in a way that becomes very actionable.
So in your report, you write that while all of our psychological needs, are universal for all of us, not everyone looks to work to fulfill them the same way. Like, we're all different. So can you walk us through the 3 dominant human capital motive profiles that you identified in your report?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's right. We found that while all needs are universal, we found 3 archetypes or profiles of how people dominantly tend to approach work. So the first one is Universalists. As the name implies, these people are looking to have all 3 of their basic human needs, security, significance, and growth, met through their organizational system. They also tend to be people who give a lot. They want a lot, they give a lot, and it's sort of the whole person mindset to how they show up at work and what they expect as well. Mm-hmm. The second profile are Transactionalists. They are the second most prevalent category behind Universalists. And the Transactionalists are there just for really security needs as their dominant motivator. So they just want fair pay, fair treatment, good benefits, healthcare, don't make this painful, and I'm happy. So those are the Transactionalists. And then the third profile are people who want security, but want to be sure that what they're spending their time on matters. So it's a combination of the security and the significance needs. The growth needs, they feel is a personal responsibility, and they're not really looking for their organization to sort of provide them with learning and development necessarily, because they feel they can steward it themselves outside of the organization if they want to. And so those we've named the stewards. So those are the 3 profiles.
I love
it. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Thank you for sharing those. I think one that I'll definitely want to have a follow-up conversation with you on is in a lot of research that we do, we find that developmental opportunities or advancing in their career is generally scores lower on surveys, both inside organizations and market research. And I think what you're saying is really interesting. And I don't think we've always teased it out enough, or I think we have an opportunity to tease out better, like what somebody perceives as organization's responsibility versus their own. Because a lot of times what I push for is, hey, if you're looking for a way to invest back in your people, usually learning and development is really amazing win-win, because it's what people want to advance in their careers and they want to learn more. And if you invest in that area, inherently they'll do better for you, right? Like your customers are going to be more satisfied. Your product will be more innovative. So if you're looking, maybe if you don't have a lot of budget and you're looking for some area to invest, that sometimes, like, especially maybe for executives, is like a good argument. But you bring up a really good point that there is a group of people that could maybe look otherwise or outside for it, and they're looking for different things. And so I think, like, I'm thinking of our measurements too. I'm like, I think there could be a question or two that we could add to better understand, like, sure, it's important for a person, but what is exactly their expectation of an organization versus just a personal desire to want to grow and develop.
Right. And one of our clients that we're working with right now was describing to me just this week about how they have a population of employees, young software engineers that have joined, and in their exit interview process, they're recognizing a pattern where a lot of these individuals came in kind of with the mindset of like a 3-year plan. Like they didn't even join the organization expecting or wanting to stay for a really long time, right? And grow through, but rather they're approaching that organization with the mindset of, this is a good stepping stone for me to continue to grow myself, my experience, and my career, not for you to provide a career ladder for me. I am handling it. And like, this is a part of my plan. But, so I think that, and that's a very different way of approaching work than sort of saying, I just need healthcare and I'm going to take a job. My mom did this, in the school system to provide my family with health benefits. And of course she liked, she loved children and all the things, but there's different types of motivations for why we choose to engage in certain organizations. And those different profiles result in essentially a one-size-fits-all approach, not necessarily always working so well.
Yeah. Well, and that's, I think we're talking so much more now even about hyper personalization. And I think there's a greater opportunity today to do that than ever before. And I know we were talking about leaders and how they can support. And so leaning into kind of those two things together, for leaders listening who are maybe in HR, maybe not, but they want to understand how better to support their people. Like, where do you think they should start, or where should they lean in? Because I feel, for me, I am an IO psychologist. I've been a leader for over 20 years, and I'm still like, there's so many things that you're sharing where I'm like, wow, I didn't know that. And I'm learning so much. I'm thinking, wow, I think anyone else that's listening to you as well is going to learn a lot. And so coming in as a mindset of a leader, whether it's somebody seasoned like me or somebody new, should they be thinking about their people's mindsets, measurements, something else, in a way to think about, how do I really best support my team and my people?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I think our bias here is that it has to start with mindset. And the most critical shift that we've seen is just that core belief, like abandoning a false belief that there's a trade-off between what's good for people and what's good for business. Because they're really, two sides of the same coin. And so, if you start from that position that there is a win-win here, and then shifting into, the curiosity and the openness and the non-judgment to learn and discover what that is, so that you can co-create, what is good for the person and what is good for business. And then, I think that's a really strong starting point to build off of. What would you say, Erin?
Yeah, I think that the mindset is important. And I think from the data, we've also seen that the security needs are the dominant need that people meet through their organizational participation. And so things that improve security can be as simple as improving your clear communication, being more transparent, providing fair process and communicating about fair process. These activities can cut angst by 4.5 times. So you can really bring down people's sort of stress response and nervous system activations by providing clarity, transparency, good communication practices, and reducing ambiguity in the environment to the extent possible is really part of the foundation on which you can build everything.
So if we want to build organizations that truly support human potential, what would you say is the most important shift we need to make right now in culture and in leadership?
Yeah, I think the single most important shift that we would recommend is to acknowledge that just like we can design our physical environment to best suit human nature and needs in physical ergonomics, so things like how your chair is shaped or the height of your monitor, so that you prevent injury and harm to the individual body and can maximize performance and sustainability in the long term by preventing injury. The same idea can be applied to human psychology and how are we designing our work environment, our systems, our processes to be in harmony with basic human needs and motives so that we can get the highest level of performance, engagement, and not create undue harm.
Well, you both have shared so many amazing ideas, and I love that they're everything you talk about is rooted in research, but everything is so practical and actionable and just real. Like I can tell that you've worked with organizations, that you are very attuned with what's going on today, what's possible, and how people can manage different things. So like I was saying, I have so many ideas. I have so many takeaways. But I will give you one more opportunity since you're both so brilliant. If there is something you could possibly add, or a last piece of advice for organizations or leaders who are striving to build better and more human cultures.
Yeah.
I think the big thing to just remember is that, performance is always a result of both the person and the context. And so what's good for people is good for business. And it's not a trade-off. It's really that by fulfilling, basic human needs and reducing friction between what people naturally need, it's actually a core business strategy. And so if you can design work to meet these fundamental human needs for security, significance, and growth, you don't just get happier employees, but you also get better business results and financial outcomes.
Erin, what would you add?
Well, I would just say that I think historically have really forced humans to adapt to kind of broken, inefficient systems. And we don't have to do that anymore. And especially with the advent and the introduction of AI into our workplaces, we have such a momentous opportunity right now to really redesign the systems themselves. And our processes, our technology, our management practices, they all can be reimagined to be in alignment with fundamental human needs and psychology better. And when we do that, not only do people thrive and feel better and show up more like themselves, but they also are going to perform more highly. It's about engineering the system for optimized performance. And so, the future of work isn't just about AI or any single new technology, but it's about how we are choosing to use these new tools to really create more human-centric workplaces and to update the old broken models that no longer serve us.
Beautifully said. Thank you both so much. I was just thinking through our conversation, one, how lucky I feel to have met you, and two, how bummed I am that it wasn't like decades ago. Now we'll have to just make up for lost time. But no, I think what you bring to our community is just absolutely brilliant. Your research is so powerful and so refreshing, and your ability to communicate it in a way that resonates, like it is a true gift. I don't meet many people who can be so scientific and so eloquent. So thank you for being just such incredible shining stars in our community, and for being, for people like me, just such wonderful role models to follow and to aspire to. And so as we start to say our goodbyes, unfortunately, because again, I wish we could have you here for much, much longer. Where can our listeners connect with you, learn more about you personally, learn more about Fractional Insights, like all the good stuff where they can, maybe become as good of friends with you as Guille and I have gotten to be?
Well, we would love that. There's lots of ways to follow along and get in touch. First of all, on LinkedIn, Erin and I are both very active. Please reach out there, follow, connect, message us if you have questions. In addition, we have a website, fractionalinsights.ai. So fractionalinsights.ai, there you can download any of the research we've been talking about or sign up for our newsletter so that you get alerts as new things emerge.
Thank you so much. We're leaving this conversation with so much gratitude again for who you are and what you do. And thank you so much for spending your time with us. And we definitely look forward to all of our continued get-togethers, collaborations, and everything. So thanks a million for who you are and what you do.
Well, we feel the same way. Thank you both so much.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. And thank you to our listeners. We'll see you again soon. Take care, everyone.
Bye.